Alright, so here's the update on the 48-foot tall passive DIY house that I'm building. So just did an 11-foot lift of concrete and wanted to share with you the good, the bad, and the ugly in terms of lessons learned when you do it DIY style. So first, we'll start off with the good. So, super excited about that wall. Had a number of people comment. I don't know if I'll go back and forth like this, but that's a 72-foot long wall, and that is basically dead on straight. So still plumb, still straight. So that's exciting, that's the good. What's also amazing about it is we actually did it without traditional bracing. Now granted, you see some bracing here, and that bracing is mainly just to help with the first concrete pour. So before anybody gets too excited, we're actually doing a couple of layers of concrete. We'll do some sand in between, but we're doing a couple of layers of concrete in the garage. So don't get too concerned about how the garage floor looks. Okay, so now some of the ugly in terms of DIY. And that is my math was not correct because I ended up with about 4 yards of extra concrete. And so what I decided to do was to put it back here and quote unquote strengthen my foundation. So that's where the extra 4 yards of concrete ended up going. Bracing on the outside did pretty well, and I say did pretty well because what I'm pouring is an 8-inch slump that has a super plasticizer in it. So when it fires off, and after about 20 minutes, it gets down to a 6 slump. Well, a 6 slump is still pretty soupy. And so I ended up deciding not to fill this wall. That wall is only filled to about 12 inches or so because it was kind of leaning in some. And this bracing on the outside was not able to keep it from leaning in. So when I saw that happening, I just filled it about 12 inches so that I'd be able to have my floor. And so good news is we'll easily be able to push that wall back out so that it is plumb. All right, some other lessons learned. Let me go down and then back up. So in terms of the crew, I had myself, my 72-year-old dad, my 2 kids that are currently just finished up with in their graduate programs, and then my uncle showed up, 2 friends, and then we obviously had the concrete pump operator and the concrete guys. Now, this area up here looks like a disaster because we did end up with a partial disaster that we were able to fix. And that is because of all the extra concrete, I started filling my foam blocks up further than my bracing, thinking, oh yeah, it should keep it. It should stay straight. Well, it didn't. It was leaning out. So you can kind of move wet concrete when it's still wet, but you can't obviously when it's dry. So what we did is we ran downstairs, we grabbed these turnbuckles, we ended up drilling and putting in these 2x4s, drilling into the 2x4, putting in some rebar, and that made it so that we could use our turnbuckles to actually pull the walls back in. Normally, it's almost impossible to pull walls back in, but because we were only pulling not a lot of wet concrete, then we were able to pull it off, and we were able to get them back level. So, note to self, don't ever pour the concrete higher than where you have your bracing. This experiment also worked really well. And so what I did was I did 2x4s around the edges, and that's what kept the concrete from bulging out. The other thing that I did is, I'll show you downstairs why I decided to go this route. But I went ahead and filled, these are my windows. So these are the bottom of the windows. I went ahead and filled those with concrete. And then let's see if I have, I don't have any of the build buck but you just shave the bottom tabs. So actually, here's a tab. So I'll end up shaving this part off so that it sits flush with that. But the advantage of this is that when I do my next pour, because remember I'm going 48 feet high, because having those views when you're 35 feet above grade, yeah, that's going to be worth it on that rooftop deck. But back to lessons learned. By having this already in place, then I'm not going to run into the problems that I had down in the basement level. So the reason why you see all of this mess is we had to get everything away quickly so that we could get these turnbuckles in place so that we could get the walls straightened out. And I'll show you one other interesting experiment that worked out nicely. So the reason why you see rebar poking up right here and not in the areas is because everywhere that the rebar is poking up, that means that I poured almost to the top. Where you see the stars is where it's like, yeah, we've got a problem, we need to straighten these things out. So that's why you see rebar poking up on the top there, is because to have my splice put 2 feet down into the wet concrete and then 2 feet is above. But right here, another issue that I noticed was that my webbing, my webbing on my, so right here, this webbing was cracked on this corner block, and I didn't have any more corner, so I decided to go ahead and fill it with the concrete, because I knew that it would be able to hold this much weight. But if I did another 10 or 12 foot pour and all of the weight was coming down on this, I would have had a blowout. So filled this entire area, and you can see this bracing method that I used, partial bracing method, worked really well on keeping the build buck absolutely flush. All right, so let's head on downstairs to the basement, because the basement was the other part of this pour. This is the first level. Also, just to give you an idea, so that's our 10-foot window, and that's the view that we get out of the 10-foot window. So super excited about that. My wife came over, and originally we planned to have an 8-foot window there, but she's like, what's the maximum size of windows that we can do? I said, we can go up to 10 feet. She said, done. All right, here's another good, the bad, and the ugly. Well, first, even down here in the basement, you'll still be able to see that view of Mount Timpanogos. All right, here's a problem. And that is, this was the window that we were using to get in and out. This was the last one that got braced. And in doing this bracing, it was not done correctly. So you can see these screws and a screw there. Well, those screws are not able to keep all the weight of all of that concrete from bowing that build buck out. So we'll end up taking all the build buck out, and then we'll end up shaving off the that foam in the back, and then we'll be able to put it back in, and it will be back to square. So not the end of the world, but definitely we'll make darn sure next time that, because this was the last minute thing just before the trucks showed up, we'll make sure that the 2x4s are in the center, and that these 2x4s are braced between here and over to there. And then we won't have a problem. And the reason why I know we won't have the problem, because over here, we did it that way. So you can see here, bracings, 2x4 bracing is in the middle, and then it's wedged from side to side, and perfection right there. Another lesson learned, and that is we used our vibrator, stuck the vibrator down in these holes, and because originally I thought, hey, it's an 8 slump with the plasticizer, and I thought it would just flow right in. Well, it flowed to about right there. And then maybe, I don't know, 10 minutes after that pour, we were able to put a vibrator in, and it helped pull down. And then we put the vibrator in up top to make sure that we didn't have any voids behind here. Had I to do it over again, as soon as I was up on the hose, because I was the one that was on the hose pouring, I'd have had somebody down here with a vibrator, and not too worried, because from my previous pour was right here, so I only needed to fill up a little bit. If we would have had a vibrator right here, it would have just pulled it from both sides and filled it in nicely, and then put the vibrator up top to make sure that there weren't any voids. But like you saw upstairs, I'm not going to have to worry about that anymore, because all of my windows from here on out, I'm building a it's a 5-story building. All of the windows will have already been filled up with concrete, and all that I'm needing to do is fill the walls to about right there. Not much to see. No, actually there is. So back to the ugly. Good, the bad, and the ugly. So here was one of the uglies. So note to self, not that I'm ever gonna, this is the forever home, not that I'm ever gonna do this again, but note to self, and that is make sure that you pour your walls first, and then pour the floor of the garage much later, after the walls have already set up, like completely set up. Because what happened, even though we had this bracing, the weight of that wet concrete up top was pushing out on these walls. So these walls are bowed out about 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 an inch starting at that point. From here, from right there below, is dead level. But then when you get to the bottom of the screen and up, it bows out about 1/4 of an inch on this side. Over here on this side, so over here is where my stairs are going to be. So my stairs were going to be 3 feet 6 inches, but I don't know. So right through here, dead level, just fine. But bottom of the screen and up starts to bow out. Up here, it actually bowed out 3/4 of an inch. So my stairs are only going to be able to be 3 feet 5 1/4. So not the end of the world, but it would have been nice to have the 3 foot 6 stairs, because granted, I'm having to custom build the whole thing anyway. And then let's go ahead and go down and see how the bracing held with the weight of wet walls and the 4 inches of concrete floor up top. So this is the room that once I get all the bracing out, it's going to be 16 feet high, 24 feet wide, 20 feet deep. And the bracing that I did was, so my first layer of bracing is those TGI trusses. And those on paper would have been enough to hold the weight of all of that concrete. But the thought of that made me nervous. And so in addition to the TGIs, I actually have OSB subfloor on top of the TGIs, and then you have the build deck on top of that, and then the 4 inches of concrete and a whole bunch of rebar. So to support the TGIs, I framed the wall, created what would be referred to as stud packs, because those 2x4s are screwed in to the webbing, and that kept the TGIs in place. And then I also have additional bracing in here to try to keep my walls plumb. And then I built 2 load-bearing walls. So all the TGIs are not doing the full span. Instead, they're doing this mini span to the load-bearing walls. And did them, not necessarily 16 inches on cinder, but I put in a bunch of 16-foot tall 2x4s. Now, what's also interesting is, I don't know if you noticed it, but there's no bracing on this wall at all. And there's no bracing. The other thing that I should point out is my first pour was to about right there. So where it says brace, that was to my first pour. My second pour starts about there and goes up. So notice no bracing on the inside. No bracing was on the outside either, which is the reason why I ended up with the 3/4 of an inch that bowed out. I shouldn't say there's no bracing. Yes, I did bracing, and I thought that this alone would be enough. Having these 2x4s and then putting them at the angle, I thought that would be enough because it's tied into down here where the concrete had already been poured and was solid. Well, it obviously was not enough. Had I done some bracing from up there down here, then maybe I would have only had my 1/4 of an inch mistake like I had on the other side. But hopefully you guys will be able to learn from my mistakes. I'm definitely going to learn from it because I still have to pour the rest of the first floor, the rest of the second floor, and the rest of the third floor. So by the time I get done, then I should have this thing down. And I also needed to point out what made it so that, because you probably noticed on the north side, I mean, I've got dead straight walls. And take a look at this. How much traditional bracing do I have? I have a total of 1 turnbuckle. That's all that was in place during this pour yesterday, was this 1 turnbuckle. I went ahead and left it in place just because that's where my door opening is. And it just felt good to have 1 turnbuckle in place, but all the rest of them, there's no traditional bracing. Instead, what I did was this bracing to my open web floor trusses, and my Watkins were held in place by 2x4s that transferred the weight down to the Watkins below. And about right here is where the previous pour ended. And so that part of my experiment, I would say, is a huge success. The other lesson learned is that, so where these were able to tie into the open web floor trusses and keep everything square and plumb, the one spot that I did an experiment was on these end walls. And I screwed in 2x4s from there to there, and then screwed in 2x4s across here, thinking that that would be enough to hold the wall in place, and it wasn't. So we ended up putting in this bracing after the fact and straightened up the walls just a little bit. So once again, it was only a 1/2 inch, not the end of the world, but I'd prefer to just go ahead and always have my walls plumb and straight, but we were able to fix it. So on the next level, we'll actually do the traditional bracing on the end walls, but with how well this worked out with no bracing using this method, we'll definitely continue to use this on our way up. And then just another little tip to help the guys downstairs who are letting you know where the how far the wet concrete has gotten. Went ahead and poured these lines, and then they'd be pounding on the walls to let me know once the concrete had reached this level so that I could keep moving. So see the lines there, and then the last lift I could visually see. So anyways, hopefully the YouTube community will be able to learn from my mistakes, and if you want to continue to follow along on this crazy journey as I build this 48-foot tall DIY passive ICF house, be sure to like and subscribe. So thanks for watching.